welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the why, what and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the articles mentioned on the screen from the Daily edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 29 September 2018, and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description below. Now let us start our discussion for the day. This news article is related to the judgment of Supreme Court on the Sabarimala case. And this news appears on page number 1, on the editorial section on page number 6 and on page number 9. And this will form a part of the General Studies paper 2 of the mains examination syllabus. Now previously UPSC has asked questions based on judgments which are related to the fundamental rights. So this topic becomes important for us from mains point of view. So let us try to understand this issue in detail. Now this is in news because the Supreme Court in a majority opinion of 4:1 has lifted a centuries old practice of prohibiting women from the age of menarche to menopause to enter the Lord Ayyappa temple at Sabarimala in Kerala. So the Supreme Court has lifted the centuries old practice of prohibiting women from entering the Lord Ayyappa temple at Sabarimala. And the decision came on a petition which was filed in 2006 against this religious practice. And this petition had sought to ensure the entry of women in the age group of 10 to 50 into the Lord Ayyappa temple at Sabarimala. Now as far as the timeline of this case is concerned, you can go through it on the page number 9 of the Hindu newspaper. Now the important issue that was discussed in the case was that the case represented a conflict between the group rights of the temple authorities and the individual rights of women to offer the worship there. So let us try to understand this aspect, that there was a conflict between the group rights of the temple authorities and the individual rights of the women to offer worship into the temple. Now as we have learned that there was a conflict between the group rights of the temple authorities, you should know that the group rights of temple authorities in managing the affairs of the temples is a part of fundamental rights under the Article 26 of the Indian Constitution. So as the Article 26 reads, according to Article 26, every religious denomination or any of its section shall have the following rights. The first is right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes. And the second one, which is important for us, is the right to manage its own affairs in matters of religion. So the temple authorities, by the virtue of this right provided under the Article 26, were practicing the prohibition of women from entering the temple in Sabarimala. However, the petition that was filed against the discriminatory practice sought that the women had individual rights and freedom to offer worship there, as have been provided under the Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. And we should know that the Article 25 provides freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. So the Article 25 further reads that all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right to freely profess, practice and propagate religion. So simply the Sabarimala case reflected the conflict between these two provisions of the Indian Constitution, wherein the Article 25 provides the freedom of practicing one's religion and the Article 26 provides the fundamental right to religious denominations to manage their own affairs in the matters of religion. Now as we know that the judgment lifted the prohibition of entry of women by a majority of 4:1 on the constitutional bench. So let us try to understand the majority opinion of the judges as noted below. So the first observation of the majority of judges was that on the one side we pray to goddesses and on the other women of certain age are considered impure. So the judges further observed that this dualistic approach is nothing but patriarchy practiced in religion. And the judgment further noted that the ban exacts more purity from women than men. This means that the ban required by the temple authorities considers that women are impure as compared to men. And you should also know that patriarchy is a system where men hold all the power and women are generally excluded. Now the second point noted by the judgment is that the exclusion on the grounds of biological and physiological features like menstruation was unconstitutional. So this was another point raised by the judgment. The third point noted by the majority of judges is that the ban amounts to discrimination based on biological factors exclusively to one particular gender only. This means that the ban provided for discrimination based on biological factors only with respect to women. So this was discriminatory in nature. The fourth point raised by the majority of judges was that the ban was violative of the right to equality and dignity of women. And we know that right to equality has been provided in the Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. Now one of the judges in the majority, that is Justice Chandrachud, noted that the prohibition on entry of women was a kind of untouchability that is being practiced. And elaborating on this practice of untouchability, Justice Chandrachud noted that The logic behind the ban was that the presence of women deviated men from celibacy. And you should know that celibacy means a state of abstaining from marriage or sexual relations. Further elaborating this, the Justice Chandrachud noted that this was like placing the burden of men's celibacy on women, thus stigmatizing women and stereotyping them. Further, the judge noted that the individual dignity of women could not be at the mercy of a mob. And finally, the judge noted that the practice of banning women from entry into the temple was not an essential part of the religion. And by this, the religious denomination does not have right to regulate this part of religious practice. The religious denomination cannot regulate the entry of women into the temple under the Article 26. Thus, the right of the temple authorities in managing the affairs of their religion has been restricted because this practice is not an essential part of the religion. So, the points noted by Justice Chandrachud are that the prohibition on entry of women was a kind of untouchability, and this amounted to stigmatizing women and stereotyping them. Further, the practice was not an essential part of the religion and hence cannot be regulated by the temple authorities under the Article 26. And further, the majority view has declared the Rule 3B of the Kerala Hindu Places of Public Worship Act of 1965. And this act had mandated the prohibition in the Sabarimala temple, and the Supreme Court judgment has termed this provision of the Act of 1965 as being ultra vires to the Constitution. This means that this is unconstitutional in nature. The judgment has further noted that the rule violated the fundamental right of a Hindu woman to offer worship at a place of her choice. This means that her right under the Article 25, which provided for freedom of conscience, has been violated. Further, the right to worship is equally available to men and women both. The bench further agreed that the Ayyappa devotees do not form a separate religious denomination under the Article 26. And explaining this, the judgment noted that Ayyappa devotees do not form a separate denomination just because of their devotion to Lord Ayyappa, but it was only a part of the Hindu worship. So till now we have understood that there was a conflict between the freedom of conscience of women. And the freedom to manage religious affairs of the temple. And this was under the Article 25, and the freedom to manage religious affairs was under Article 26. And the judgment has noted that the practice was nothing but patriarchy practiced under the garb of religion. Further, the judgment has noted that the exclusion on the grounds of biological and physiological features like menstruation was unconstitutional. And it also amounted to discrimination based on biological factors exclusive to women. Further, it was violative of the right to equality and dignity of women under the Article 14. The judgment has noted that the prohibition on entry of women was a kind of untouchability and it leads to stigmatizing women and stereotyping them. The judgment has further noted that it is not an essential part of the religious practice. The judgment has further noted that the Rule 3B of the Kerala Hindu Places of Public Worship Act of 1965 is unconstitutional in nature because it violated the fundamental right of a Hindu woman to offer worship at a place of her choice. Further, the judgment noted that the right to worship is equally available to men and women both. Further, the judgment has also noted that the Ayyappa devotees do not form a separate religious denomination. So all these justifications have been provided in the judgment in lifting the ban on the entry of women into the Sabarimala temple. Now the news article on page number 9 reads that the Bombay High Court judgment in the Narasu Appamali judgment stands invalid after the Sabarimala verdict. So let us understand the original judgment under the Narasu Appamali judgment. The judgment read that the personal law, religious customs, usages and beliefs are outside the ambit of fundamental rights of equality, life and dignity. The judgment had further noted that the personal law is not a law or law in force under the Article 13. And this 1951 judgment was never challenged in the Supreme Court. Now Article 13 of the Indian Constitution discusses about the laws which are inconsistent with the fundamental rights. And it declares that all the laws that are inconsistent with or in derogation of any of the fundamental rights shall be void. However, the judgment of Bombay High Court noted that the personal laws were not a law or laws in force under the Article 31. Hence, the personal law does not stand the scrutiny of fundamental rights. Hence, the judgment noted that the personal laws are outside the ambit of fundamental rights of equality, life and dignity. Now, during the judgment of Sabarimala case, Justice Chandrachud provided observation on the Bombay High Court's judgment of 1951. Under this, Justice Chandrachud observed that customs, usages and personal laws have a significant impact on the civil status of individuals. Further, he observed that those activities that are inherently connected with the civil status of individuals cannot be granted constitutional immunity merely because they may have some associational features which have a religious nature. So, under this, the justice observed that the immunity given to personal law customs deviates from the vision of social transformation of the constitution. Thus, due to these observations in the Sabarimala case, the judgment of 1951 of Bombay High Court has been reversed, which provided immunity to the personal laws from the scrutiny under fundamental rights. Now let us look at the dissenting opinion provided by Justice Indu Malhotra in the Sabarimala case. And by dissenting opinion we mean that the judge provided a view which was different from the majority opinion. Now under this she held that essentiality of a religious practice or custom had to be decided within the religion. So according to her, a religious practice is essential to the religion or not should be decided by the religious denomination itself. Further, she said that it was a matter of personal faith. She observed that India was a land of diverse faiths and constitutional morality in a pluralistic society gave freedom to practice even irrational or illogical customs and usages. So, in short, she has discussed that the essentiality of a religious practice should be decided within the religion itself. This means that she indirectly provides the power to the religious denomination to regulate the religious affairs. She further observed that the freedom to practice their beliefs was enshrined in Article 25 of the Constitution, and the harmonization of fundamental rights with religion included providing freedom for diverse sects to practice their customs and beliefs. So, in short, she has provided that the diverse sects or the religious denominations have been provided freedom to practice their customs and beliefs under the Article 26, and there has to be harmonization of the fundamental rights with that of the fundamental rights of religious denominations under Article 26. Further, she said that there was a strong and plausible reasons to show that Ayyappa devotees had attributes of a religious denomination. So she said that the Lord Ayyappa devotees can be identified as a religious denomination and they have full rights under the Article 26 to regulate their religious affairs. And providing arguments that the Lord Ayyappa devotees are a religious denomination, she argues that they have a distinct name, they have different distinct properties, and also the Sabarimala temple was not funded out of the Consolidated Fund of India. Let us discuss the points that have been highlighted in the editorial on page number 6. Now the editorial reads that the judgment noted that the exclusionary practices, that is the exclusion of women from worshipping in the temple, violates the right of women devotees and establishes the legal principle that individual freedom prevails over the group rights even in matters of religion. So the editorial says that this principle has been established as a result of the Sabarimala verdict. The editorial further reads that the majority held that devotees of Lord Ayyappa do not constitute a separate religious denomination and that the prohibition on women is not an essential part of Hindu religion. So in short, it has provided the summary of the judgment. The editorial highlights another important point. So this point is that the court has also sought to grapple or raise the issue of stigmatization of women devotees, which is based on the medieval view of menstruation as a symbolizing impurity and pollution. So the editorial highlights that the judgment has not just decided the legal issue. However, it has also highlighted the issue of stigmatization of women devotees, which is based on the medieval views like the menstruation, which symbolizes impurity and pollution. So this is a negative or discriminatory view against the women. So the judgment has also highlighted this important issue. And in the conclusion, the editorial reads that the decision of Supreme Court reaffirms the Constitution's transformative character and derives strength from the centrality it accords to the fundamental rights. So this judgment shows the transformative character of the Indian Constitution, and it also strengthens the centrality that has been accorded to the fundamental rights by the Supreme Court in various judgments. Regarding this, the editorial has provided observations of the 3 judges in the Sabarimala case. So under this, Justice Deepak Mishra has observed that any rule based on the segregation of women pertaining to biological characteristics is indefensible and unconstitutional. He further observes that devotion cannot be subjected to stereotypes of gender. This means that men and women have equality in terms of devotion. Further, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud said that stigma built around traditional notions of impurity has no place in the constitutional order, and exclusion based on the notion of impurity is a form of untouchability. Further, Justice Rohington F. Nariman said that the fundamental rights claimed by worshippers based on customs and usage must yield to the fundamental right of women to practice religion. This means that the individual freedom to practice religion gets precedence over the group rights of the religious denominations under the Article 26. Now, after going through the various points that have been highlighted in this discussion, you should try and answer this question from mains point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. Now, this article on page number 7 is related to the ancient port town of Muziris on the Malabar coast. And in 1341, it was destroyed by a flood in the river Periyar. And the same region has again witnessed the floods in the monsoons. So let us try to understand some key facts that are related to the port town of Muziris from the history point of view. Now, this will form a part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic History of India. And in the mains examination syllabus, it will form a part of the art and culture. Now, previously in the year 2017, a question was asked related to the important seaport in the Kakatiya kingdom. So this becomes important for us from prelims point of view as well. Now, in the year 2016, the Honorable President of India, Shri Pranab Mukherjee, had inaugurated the Muziris Heritage Project. Further, the mains examination of 2018, which is currently going on, a question was asked related to safeguarding of the Indian art heritage. So this project can be used in answering such questions. So let us try to understand some of the key historical facts related to the Muziris Port as were highlighted by the speech of the Honorable President of India. Now, the Muziris Port at the height of its glory was an active port, and it traded everything from precious stones to spices. Further, Muziris was the doorway for cultures, religions and races into India, and it was situated on the Malabar coast. Further, it was frequented by large ships of ocean traders from across the world, which included Arabs, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans and the Chinese. The name Mukiripatnam is mentioned in the Sangam literature, which spans from 300 BC to 300 CE. And the Sangam literature mentions it as an affluent port and habitation on the western coast of Tamizagam. In Akkana Nuru, a book of Sangam anthology, the poet describes Muziris as a prosperous town on the banks of river Periyar. And it was visited by the Yavanasaurs Greeks seeking pepper in exchange of gold. So the important points for us from prelims point of view are that the name Mukiripatnam is mentioned in the Sangam literature, and it is mentioned as an affluent port and habitation on the western coast of Tamizagam. So it is identified with the Muziris port. Further, in the Akkana Nuru, a book of Sangam anthology, the Muziris port has been described as a prosperous town on the banks of river Periyar. So these 2 points should be noted. Now, the other accounts in which the Muziris port has been mentioned are also important for us. Now, the Muziris finds mention in the Voyage Around the Erythraean Sea, which was a work by Greek-speaking Egyptian merchant from the middle of 1st century CE. So, the source in which the Muziris port has been mentioned is also important for us from prelims point of view. And this source describes Muziris as one of the 4 active ports which exported pepper and other goods. Now, Pliny, who was a Roman naturalist of the 1st century CE, has referred to Muziris port in his work Naturalis Historia. Further, it is believed that a devastating flood that changed the course of Periyar River or an earthquake in the 14th century led to the decline of Muziris. However, the Malabar coast remained a prime destination for foreign traders and visitors from different parts of the world even after the decline of Muziris. And travelers such as Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo visited and wrote accounts about the busy ports of Malabar. Further, the Arabs continued their flourishing trade in spices, and the Chinese were frequent visitors to the Malabar coast. And you should know that Periyar River is a west flowing river located in the state of Kerala, which was also in news because of the recent floods in the state of Kerala. Now, before moving ahead, let us try to answer this question which was asked in 2017 prelims. The question reads, which one of the following was a very important seaport in the Kakatiya kingdom? So the answer is B, Motupalli. With this, let us move on to the next article. The lead article on page number 6 challenges the efficacy of Aadhar in helping the poor sections of India. So let us try to understand the author's point of view on Aadhar under this news article. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 2 of the mains examination under the section Mechanisms Constituted for the Protection and Betterment of Vulnerable Sections and Issues Relating to Poverty and Hunger. Now, in the year 2017, in the mains examination, in the General Studies paper 2, two questions were asked related to poverty alleviation programs and their successes since independence. So many of the points highlighted in this article can be used in writing these two answers in the mains examination. So let us try to understand the points that have been highlighted by the author under this article. And regarding the details of the Aadhar judgment, you can refer to the DNS of 27 September 2018, which was presented by Basava sir. Now first, let us try to understand the focus of this article. Now under this article, the author argues that the benefits of Aadhar which are projected by the government are a misbelief and are not backed by the data. Further, the author says that the upholding of Section 7 of the Aadhar Act, which allows the government to make Aadhar card mandatory to avail benefits under various schemes, was done on the basis of mere assertions and was not based on facts. So simply the author says that the benefits of Aadhar, or rather the social benefits of Aadhar, are not backed by proper data and are not based on facts. So let us try to understand some of the key points highlighted by the author in support of her argument. So the author challenges the arguments that were provided by the government during the hearing under the Aadhar case. So first, the author says that the assertion about the inclusion and identification is based on unreliable and faulty data. For example, the author says that the UIDAI submitted two different figures on the biometric accuracy of Aadhar. However, the author says that the biometric accuracy of Aadhar comes into question because of various hunger deaths that are caused in different states of India. For example, one of the deaths was reported from the state of Jharkhand. Further, the author says that various hunger deaths can be traced to the Aadhar related disruptions in rations and pensions. And this was all because of biometric authentication failures. Secondly, the author says that Aadhar has led to inclusion is a wrong belief, which means that Aadhar has not led to sufficient inclusion of poor and vulnerable people under the government's welfare schemes. For this, the author says that Aadhar is touted as free. However, many people have paid to get the Aadhar ID. Further, those with disability have found it very hard to enroll or have failed to enroll for the Aadhar ID itself. The third point highlighted by the author is that the number of people excluded from getting Aadhar may be small, but they happen to be the most vulnerable section. For example, most of them include bedridden old persons, victims of accidents, and people with visual disabilities, etc. Further, the author says that it is a misconception that for millions of Indians, it is the only ID they have. In support of this, the author says that according to a response to an RTI, 99.97% of those who got Aadhar numbers did so on the basis of existing IDs. This means that Aadhar is not the only identification available with the people of India, and they have different existing identification cards as well. Further, the author questions and says that it is unclear how the Aadhar enables inclusion into government welfare programs. And in support of this, the author says that each government program has its own eligibility criteria. For example, in public distribution system, there are state-specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. However, after the coming of Aadhar, on the top of satisfying the existing state-specific inclusion and exclusion criteria or the eligibility criteria, one needs to procure and link their Aadhar number in order to continue to remain eligible for the PDS ration card. This means that the number of steps have now increased for getting included in the government welfare program. Thirdly, the biggest reason of exclusion from government programs remains the fact that India's spending on welfare remains abysmally low. This means that inclusion cannot be just increased by the introduction of Aadhar. However, the inclusion will only increase if India starts spending more on the welfare programs. Fourthly, the author argues that before the National Food Security Act of 2013 was implemented, roughly 15% of the Indian population was covered by the PDS or the public distribution system. However, the NFSA expanded coverage to about 2/3 of the total population. Further, the author says that this expansion of the PDS is what has led to the inclusion. So the author argues that the inclusion under the government welfare schemes will increase only when the government starts spending more on the welfare programs. For example, what it did under the National Food Security Act, and this led to the increasing number of inclusion under the Food Security Act, which was earlier at around 50%. However, it increased to about two-thirds of the total population after the introduction of National Food Security Act. Further, the author says that Aadhar is not the ultimate tool against the corruption. Under this, the author says that quantity fraud continues even after Aadhar-based biometric authentication has been introduced. This means that the Aadhar is not helpful in checking the quantity frauds. For example, even after the introduction of Aadhar, the beneficiary may get lesser amount than her entitlement. Further, she will be made to sign on the document as if she has received the full amount. So the Aadhar does not remove the chances of quantity fraud. Further, the author says that though the government claims that Aadhar would solve the problem of fake and ghost names in the rolls. However, the author says that there is no reliable evidence on the magnitude of identity fraud problem. The ghost names or the fake names means that there are multiple people with the same name or same identity card. However, the author says that there is no reliable evidence on the magnitude of identity fraud or the ghost identification cards for welfare schemes. In support of this, the author says that a recent independent survey and government data are beginning to suggest that it wasn't the main form of corruption. Quoting an example, the author says that linking Aadhar cards with the PDS in the Odisha led to the discovery of only 0.3% duplicate cards. This means that the ghost cards or the number of fake identity cards was very less, and only about 0.3% duplicate cards were found in PDS system in Odisha. Further, in the conclusion, the author says that those who benefit from these programs and who understand why Aadhar cannot improve the inclusion do not have a voice in media or in the policy making. This means that the people who understand why Aadhar cannot improve inclusion do not have a participation in the policy making process. And due to this, this allows anecdotes and mere conjectures to become the basis of taking big decisions. This means that the big decisions are not backed by facts and data. So the author concludes and says that the need of the hour is evidence-based making. So the author says that the need of the hour is evidence-based policy making. Now, after going through some of the points highlighted by this article, you should try and answer this question from mains point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. This editorial on page number 6 analyzes the impact of the decision of Center to increase custom duty on imports of 19 non-essential items. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 of the mains examination under the topic Indian Economy and Issues Relating to Planning and Mobilization of Resources. So let us try to understand some of the points highlighted by this editorial. And regarding the details of imposition of custom duty on imports of 19 non-essential items, you can refer to the DNS of 27 September 2018, which was presented by Baswa sir. So in this article, the author has highlighted that tinkering in the import duties or changing or increasing the import duties will not achieve its objective to narrow down the current account deficit. Now let us try to understand what is current account deficit. So simply, the current account deficit is a measurement of a country's trade where the value of the goods and services it imports exceeds the value of goods and services it exports. So the current account deficit means the value of imports of goods and services is larger than the value of exports of goods and services by a country. Further, the current account includes the net income such as the interest and dividends and the transfers such as foreign aid. And the current account represents a country's foreign transaction and is a component of the country's balance of payment. Now let us try to understand the author's point of view on why the imposition of import duty is not enough to handle the problem of current account deficit. So author is of the opinion that increase in the customs duty on import of 19 non-essential items won't address a structural macroeconomic issue. Substantiating this point, the author says that the aggregate of import value of all the items for which the import duties are increased amount to rupees 86,000 crores, and it is less than 3% of the country's merchandise import bill. So this means that it only contributes to 3% of country's import value. So the author says that this step is very short term and marginal in nature, and it will be difficult to control the current account deficit by imposing import duty on such small value of imports. Further, the author feels that the increase in the import duty may even reduce the consumption, and this can have a negative impact on industry as rupee has weakened against the dollar. So the author says that the step of imposing import duty on non-essential items can further reduce the consumption expenditure, and this can negatively impact the industry. For this, the author cites the example of aviation industry. Under this, the author says that the aviation industry is suffering because of increased cost of aviation fuel, and the government has also imposed 5% custom duty on aviation turbine fuel. So this will further increase the costs in the aviation industry, and this will lead to reduced consumption, and which can have a negative impact on the industry's profitability. Further, the author has provided certain suggestions to improve the position of current account deficit. Under this, the author says that steps must be taken to boost export, and simultaneously steps should be taken to reduce the imports as well. So both the increase in export and reduction in import should go hand in hand. Further, the author says that the government should expedite the refund of GST to the exporters. This is because the small exporters are suffering from cash crunch, and expediting the process of refund of GST to the small exporters will lead to an increase in the exports. Further, the author says that thermal coal is India's fastest growing import, and it is a consequence of underinvestment in modernizing the entire coal production and the utilization chain. So the author highlights that there is a need for increasing the investment in modernizing the entire coal production and utilization chain, and this will help in reducing the imports of thermal coal for India. And finally, the author says that following a sanction on Iran, India's import from Iran may come down considerably, and we need to have a plan to handle this. Otherwise, the current account deficit might exceed 3% of the GDP. So the solutions provided by the author are that steps must be taken to boost exports, as well as simultaneously steps should be taken to reduce the imports. Further, the refund of GST to the exporter should be expedited, and this will help in increasing the exports. There is a need for investment in modernizing the entire coal production process, and this will help in reducing the thermal coal imports, which are growing at a fastest rate. And finally, India needs to have a plan because of the sanctions that are being put on the Iran, because India's imports from Iran may come down considerably after this, and this can have an adverse effect on the current account deficit situation, which might exceed to around 3% of the GDP. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us move on to the question for the day.